I took a beggar home, not knowing he was a millionaire. What he did next shocked everyone, including me. You know how some moments in life feel like they're happening to someone else, like you're watching a movie of your own existence, wondering how the hell you ended up in that particular scene. That's exactly how I felt on that freezing December night in Detroit, when I made a decision that would unravel everything I thought I knew about my past and reshape my entire future. My name is Madison Carter, and I'm 28 years old. Well, I was 28 that night. Seems like a lifetime ago now. I work as a nurse at Detroit General, pulling the graveyard shift because, let's be honest, night shifts pay better, and as a single mom, every extra dollar counts. My daughter Emma was 8 then. This incredible little ball of energy who somehow managed to keep me sane during the darkest periods of my life. It had been 6 years since Ryan died. 6 long, lonely years since that phone call shattered my world into a million pieces. Car accident, they said. Died instantly, they assured me. Like that was supposed to make it hurt less. Emma was only 2 when it happened. Barely old enough to understand why Daddy wasn't coming home anymore. Since then, it's been just the 2 of us against the world, scraping by on my nurse's salary and the occasional overtime shift. That particular December night was brutal. One of those Michigan winters that cuts straight through your bones no matter how many layers you pile on. I'd just finished a 12-hour shift that felt more like 24. We'd lost 2 patients that night, and I was emotionally drained in that way that only healthcare workers understand. You learn to compartmentalize, to push through, but some nights the weight of it all just sits heavy on your chest. I was walking to my beat-up Honda Civic in the hospital parking lot, my breath forming little clouds in the frigid air, when I saw him. At first, I thought it was just a pile of discarded clothes someone had dumped on the sidewalk. Detroit's not exactly known for its cleanliness, but as I got closer, I realized it was a person, a man, unconscious, lying on the cold concrete like he'd been thrown there. My nursing instincts kicked in immediately. I dropped my purse and knelt beside him, my knees hitting the icy pavement. He appeared to be in his mid-30s, with dark brown hair that was matted with blood from a gash on his forehead. His clothes, what remained of them, looked expensive. A torn designer shirt, dress pants that had seen better days. Someone had worked him over pretty good. I pressed 2 fingers against his neck, searching for a pulse. It was there, weak but steady. His skin was ice cold, and I could see his lips had that bluish tint that screamed hypothermia. This man was dying, slowly but surely, right there on the sidewalk outside the hospital where I'd just spent 12 hours trying to save other people's lives. "Sir, can you hear me?" I whispered, gently shaking his shoulder. Nothing. I looked around for help, but the street was deserted. It was past midnight, and even the usual crowd of smokers who gathered outside the hospital had called it a night. That's when he stirred. His eyelids fluttered open, revealing the most striking blue eyes I'd ever seen. But there was something else there too. Fear, raw, desperate fear that made my heart clench. "Please," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Don't call the police." I stared at him, my mind racing. Every protocol I'd ever learned said to call 911, get him to the ER, follow procedure. But something in those blue eyes stopped me. Maybe it was the way his hand reached out and gripped mine with surprising strength. Or maybe it was the desperation in his voice. Or maybe, after 6 years of existing instead of living, I was just ready to do something completely irrational. "What's your name?" I asked, helping him sit up against the building wall. "Alexander?" he managed, wincing as he moved. "Please, if you call the police, they'll find me. And if they find me..." He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung in the frigid air between us. I should have walked away, should have called 911 and let the professionals handle it. Should have thought about Emma sleeping safely at home with Mrs. Rodriguez, our elderly neighbor who watched her during my night shifts. Should have considered that bringing a stranger into our lives could put everything I'd worked so hard to build at risk. Instead, I found myself saying, "Can you walk? My car's right here." The drive to my small house in Highland Park was surreal. Alexander, if that was even his real name, drifted in and out of consciousness in my passenger seat, occasionally mumbling things I couldn't quite catch. I kept glancing at him, trying to figure out what I was doing. Here I was, a single mother with an 8-year-old daughter, bringing home a beaten-up stranger who was probably running from something or someone dangerous. But you know what? For the first time in years, I felt truly alive. My heart was pounding, adrenaline coursing through my veins, and I realized I'd been sleepwalking through life since Ryan died. This moment, terrifying and stupid as it was, felt real in a way nothing had for a long time. When we got to my house, I helped Alexander inside. Careful not to wake Emma. My living room suddenly felt tiny with this mysterious man in it. I settled him on my couch and went to get my medical supplies. One of the few perks of being a nurse is having a well-stocked first aid kit at home. As I cleaned his wounds, I found myself studying his face. Even beaten up and unconscious, there was something almost aristocratic about his features. His hands, when I examined them for injuries, were soft. Not the hands of someone who'd spent much time doing manual labor. Everything about him screamed contradiction. "Thank you," he whispered when I finished bandaging the worst of his cuts. "I know this is crazy. I know you don't know me from Adam, but thank you." I sat back on my heels, looking at this stranger who'd somehow ended up on my couch. "You're right. This is crazy. But sometimes crazy is exactly what we need." As I watched him drift off to sleep, I had no idea that this moment of compassion would lead me down a path that would reveal devastating truths about Ryan's death, connect me to a world of wealth and danger I never knew existed, and ultimately bring me face to face with a love so profound it would change everything. I thought I knew about my own story. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd just kept walking that night, if I'd called 911 like I was supposed to, if I'd chosen safety over compassion, protocol over instinct. But then I look at my life now, at Emma calling Alexander Uncle Daddy, at the foundation we've built together, at the justice we've brought to so many families like ours. And I know that freezing December night was exactly when my real life began. Looking back now, those 3 weeks with Alexander feel like they existed in some alternate reality, a strange, beautiful bubble where time moved differently, and everything felt both completely natural and utterly surreal. I keep replaying those days in my mind, searching for clues I missed, signs that should have told me who he really was. But honestly, I was too busy falling for him to see past the mystery. The morning after I brought him home, Emma found us in the living room. I was checking his bandages when she appeared in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Most kids would have been scared or confused, but Emma has always been this incredible little person who just accepts whatever life throws at her. Maybe losing her dad so young taught her to roll with the punches. "Mommy, who's the hurt man?" she asked, climbing onto my lap like it was the most normal thing in the world. "This is Alexander," I said, watching his face carefully. "He got hurt and needs somewhere to stay while he gets better." Alexander's eyes met mine over Emma's head, and I saw something there. Gratitude mixed with something else I couldn't quite identify. "Hi, Emma," he said softly. "Your mom's taking really good care of me." What struck me immediately was how he talked to her. Not that condescending way some adults use with kids, but like she was a real person whose opinions mattered. Emma, being Emma, decided right then and there that she liked him. Over the next few days, I started noticing things that didn't add up. Alexander would unconsciously correct Emma's pronunciation of Spanish words she was learning at school. Not just basic stuff, but complex grammatical structures. When I was watching the news in French, I'd taken it in college and liked to practice, he'd occasionally mutter responses under his breath, clearly understanding every word. One evening, I found him reading one of my medical textbooks. Not skimming, actually reading, with the kind of focus that suggested he understood what he was looking at. When I asked about it, he just shrugged and said he'd always been curious about medicine, but the way he asked follow-up questions about pharmacology and surgical procedures, that wasn't casual curiosity, that was education. His table manners were impeccable in a way that seemed automatic. Unconscious, he held his fork like someone who'd grown up eating at formal dining tables, not someone who'd been living on the streets. And his vocabulary, God, the way this man spoke, even when he was exhausted or in pain, his words were carefully chosen, articulate in a way that suggested expensive schools and cultured upbringing. I found myself studying him when he wasn't looking, trying to solve the puzzle he presented. During the day, while Emma was at school and I was trying to catch up on sleep, he'd move around my small house with this quiet grace that seemed almost out of place. He never touched anything without asking, never made a mess, never acted entitled to the space I'd given him. But there was something about the way he examined my books, the way he looked at family photos, that suggested he was filing away information. The nights were when things got really interesting. After Emma went to bed, we'd sit in my tiny kitchen drinking coffee. Well, I'd drink coffee. He'd usually just hold the mug like he was trying to warm his hands. And we'd talk, really talk, in a way I hadn't done with anyone since Ryan died. He told me stories about places he'd traveled, Paris cafes where he'd spent hours people-watching, ancient libraries in Rome where he'd lost entire days, mountain villages in Peru where locals had shared their meals with him. The way he described these places wasn't like someone who'd backpacked through on a shoestring budget. These were details someone with money would notice. The thread count of hotel sheets, the vintage of wine served at exclusive restaurants, the kind of insider access that comes with connections. But whenever I'd ask direct questions about his family or his past, he'd deflect with the skill of someone who'd had lots of practice avoiding personal topics. "It's complicated," he'd say. Or, "Some stories are better left untold." The evasiveness should have been a red flag. But instead, it just made him more intriguing. What really got to me was how gentle he was with Emma. She'd started including him in her evening routine, bringing him drawings she'd made at school, or asking him to help with homework. He'd sit on the floor with her, this tall, mysterious man folding himself down to her level, listening to 8-year-old logic with the same attention he'd give a CEO in a boardroom. One night, I caught him braiding her hair while she watched cartoons. His fingers moved with practiced ease, creating these intricate patterns that were way too sophisticated for someone who'd just learned on the fly. When I asked where he'd picked up that skill, he got that faraway look in his eyes and said he'd had a lot of practice with someone important to him. The physical attraction between us was undeniable, building slowly like a fire that starts with sparks and gradually consumes everything in its path. It had been 6 years since I'd felt anything close to desire, and I'd honestly thought that part of me had died with Ryan. But Alexander awakened something I'd forgotten existed. It started with small touches. His hand brushing mine when I changed his bandages, the way he'd steady me when I lost my balance reaching for something on a high shelf. Then came the longer looks, the conversations that stretched past midnight, the electricity in the air when we found ourselves standing too close in my narrow hallway. But it was the way he looked at me that really undid me. Not like I was just the woman who'd rescued him, but like I was someone worth truly seeing. He'd listen when I talked about work, ask follow-up questions about patients I'd mentioned, remember details about my life that even close friends sometimes forgot. When was the last time someone had paid attention to me like that? The nightmares started during his second week with us. I'd hear him talking in his sleep, sometimes pleading, sometimes what sounded like arguments with people who weren't there. Names would surface from whatever hell he was reliving. Sebastian, Victoria, someone called Charlotte, but it was the way he'd whisper, "I'm sorry, Ryan," that really caught my attention. Ryan isn't exactly an uncommon name, but hearing it in the middle of his troubled dreams made something cold settle in my stomach. When I'd try to wake him from these episodes, he'd come to consciousness like someone emerging from underwater, gasping, disoriented, sometimes not recognizing where he was for a few terrifying seconds. He'd apologize profusely, promise it wouldn't happen again, but never explain what demons he was wrestling with in his sleep. By the 3rd week, I realized I was in serious trouble, not because I thought Alexander was dangerous, though he probably was in ways I couldn't yet understand, but because I was falling in love with him. Real, honest to God, change your whole life kind of love, the kind I'd only felt once before with Ryan, and that terrified me more than any mystery or contradiction about Alexander's past ever could. There's this moment when you realize you're about to cross a line you can never uncross. For me, that moment came on a Tuesday night, 3 weeks after I'd brought Alexander home. Emma was finally asleep after what felt like hours of bedtime negotiations, and I found him standing by my kitchen window, staring out at the snow falling under the streetlight. The bruises on his face had faded to yellow and green, and most of his cuts had healed into thin pink lines. He looked almost normal now, except for that haunted expression that never quite left his eyes. I'd been fighting my feelings for days, telling myself I was just being a good Samaritan, that the flutter in my stomach when he smiled was just gratitude for having another adult around. But standing there in my kitchen that night, watching him in the dim light, I couldn't lie to myself anymore. I was falling hard for this mysterious man who'd literally stumbled into my life. "Penny, for your thoughts?" I asked, moving to stand beside him. He turned to look at me, and something in his expression made my breath catch. "I was thinking about how long it's been since I've felt safe anywhere," he said quietly. "Your home. It feels like a sanctuary I never thought I'd find." The guilt hit me immediately. Here I was, developing feelings for someone else, and Ryan hadn't even been gone 7 years. What kind of person was I? What kind of mother? I'd spent so long telling Emma that Daddy was watching over us, that he'd want us to be happy, but actually moving on felt like betrayal. "Madison," Alexander said, and the way he said my name made me look up at him. "What are you thinking about? You look like you're carrying the weight of the world." I started, then stopped. "How do you explain to someone that you're falling for them while simultaneously feeling guilty about dishonoring your dead boyfriend's memory?" "It's complicated," he smiled, and it was the first genuine smile I'd seen from him. I seemed to have cornered the market on complicated. That's when it happened. He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. Such a simple gesture, but it sent electricity shooting through my entire body. Our eyes met, and I saw my own longing reflected back at me when he leaned down and kissed me, soft and tentative at first, then deeper when I didn't pull away. It felt like coming home and jumping off a cliff at the same time. "I'm sorry," he whispered against my lips. "I shouldn't have." "Don't apologize," I said, surprising myself with how breathless I sounded. "Please don't apologize." That kiss opened something between us that had been building for weeks. Over the next few days, stolen moments became longer conversations, which became gentle touches, which became a carefully orchestrated dance around the reality that we were both falling in love under the most impossible circumstances. What amazed me was how naturally Alexander fit into our little family dynamic. Emma had completely adopted him, dragging him into her elaborate games of make-believe and insisting he read her bedtime stories in what she called his fancy voice. Watching them together made my heart swell and break at the same time. Emma had been so young when Ryan died that she barely remembered having a father figure. But with Alexander, she bloomed like a flower finally getting sunlight. "Mommy," she said one evening while I was making dinner, "is Alexander going to stay with us forever?" The question caught me off guard, partly because I'd been wondering the same thing. "I don't know, sweetheart. Alexander has his own life he needs to get back to. But he likes us." "Right. And we like him. Isn't that how it works?" Out of the mouths of babes. If only love were that simple. Alexander had overheard the conversation from the living room, and that night, after Emma was asleep, he brought it up. "She asked you about me staying," he said. It wasn't a question. "Kids get attached quickly," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "I hope you understand that when you leave, it's going to be hard for her." "And what about you?" he asked. "Will it be hard for you?" I looked at him. This man who'd become so essential to my daily routine that I couldn't imagine my house without him in it. "Yes," I admitted. "It'll destroy me." That's when he told me he was falling in love with me too. Not in some grand romantic gesture, but quietly, honestly, like he was confessing something that scared him as much as it thrilled him. We talked until dawn that night. About Ryan, about the guilt I felt, about the fact that Alexander was still clearly running from something that could put all of us in danger. "I wish I could tell you everything," he said, holding my hand across my small kitchen table. "But there are things in my past that could hurt you and Emma if the wrong people found out you knew." "Are you married?" I asked, because that was my biggest fear. "No, never been married. No girlfriend. No secret family somewhere, but Madison, there are people who want to hurt me. And if they knew how much you and Emma mean to me," the way he said it told me everything I needed to know about the level of danger he was talking about. This wasn't about unpaid debts or petty criminals. This was something bigger. Something that had him looking over his shoulder constantly and waking up in cold sweats. Christmas was magical that year, in a way it hadn't been since Ryan died. Alexander insisted on buying presents for Emma, though I have no idea where he got the money. When I asked, he just smiled and said he had some resources he could access. The gifts he chose were perfect. Art supplies for Emma's creative streak, books that challenged her reading level without being too advanced, a beautiful necklace for me that must have cost more than I made in a month. "Alexander, this is too much," I protested when I opened the small velvet box. "It's not nearly enough," he said, fastening the clasp at the back of my neck while Emma played with her new watercolors. "You've given me something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that?" "Hope." Christmas Eve. After Emma had finally crashed from sugar and excitement, Alexander and I made love for the first time. It was gentle and desperate and perfect and terrifying all at once. Afterward, lying in my bed listening to him breathe, I felt more complete than I had since Ryan died. "I love you," he whispered into the darkness. "Whatever happens, I need you to know that what I feel for you is real. You and Emma brought me back to life." "I love you too," I whispered back, and meant it with every fiber of my being. But even as I said the words, I could feel him holding something back. There was a sadness in the way he held me that night, like he was trying to memorize every detail. When I woke up the next morning and found his side of the bed empty, I knew immediately that something was wrong. Alexander was gone, and somehow, I knew he wasn't coming back. The absence of someone you love has its own sound, a hollow ringing that fills every corner of your world until you can't escape it. That's what Christmas morning felt like when I woke up to find Alexander's side of the bed cold and empty, his pillow still holding the faint scent of his cologne, but no trace of the man himself. At first, I thought maybe he'd just gotten up early. You know how your mind tries to protect you from the truth sometimes. I padded through the house in my robe, checking the kitchen, the living room, even the bathroom, calling his name softly so I wouldn't wake Emma, but deep down I already knew. The careful way he'd held me the night before, the intensity in his eyes when he said he loved me. It had felt like goodbye. That's when I saw the letter. It was propped against the coffee maker, my name written across the envelope in his careful handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it, and I had to read it 3 times before the words actually sank in. "Madison, you and Emma have given me something I thought I'd lost forever. The ability to love and be loved in return. These past 3 weeks have been the most beautiful of my life, and if I could stay in this perfect bubble we've created forever, I would. But there are things in my past that I can't run from anymore, things that could destroy everything good if I don't face them. I've been selfish keeping you in the dark, letting myself fall in love with you when I knew this day would come. People are looking for me, dangerous people who wouldn't hesitate to hurt you or Emma to get to me. I'm leaving because I love you, not because I don't. I need to resolve a situation that could destroy us all if it's not handled properly. Please don't try to find me. Don't ask questions that could put you in danger. If something happens to me, go to Robert Thompson at Thompson & Associates downtown. He has instructions to take care of you and Emma. The retainer fee is already paid. You saved my life that night on the sidewalk. But you did so much more than that. You reminded me what it means to be human. Take care of our girl. Tell her I'm sorry I couldn't stay to watch her grow up. I love you more than my own life." Alexander, I must have stood there for 20 minutes, reading and rereading those words. Part of me was furious. How dare he make this decision for us? How dare he decide what was best for Emma and me without even discussing it? But underneath the anger was this crushing fear that I'd never see him again. The sound of Emma's feet running down the hallway snapped me back to reality. I quickly folded the letter and shoved it in my robe pocket, trying to compose myself before she burst into the living room expecting Christmas morning magic. "Mommy, it's Christmas. Where's Alexander? I want to show him my presents." God. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that the man she'd grown attached to had vanished in the night? How do you tell her that sometimes people leave without warning, even when they love you? "Alexander had to go away, sweetheart," I managed, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. "Something important came up with his family. But he'll be back, right? He promised he'd teach me how to make that fancy French toast." The hope in her voice nearly broke me. "I don't know, baby. I don't know." The next 2 weeks were hell. I went through the motions of normal life. Work, taking care of Emma, grocery shopping, paying bills. But inside I was falling apart. Every morning I'd wake up hoping to find Alexander in the kitchen making coffee, and every morning the reality would hit me fresh. He was gone. Emma asked about him constantly the first few days, then less frequently as kids do when they sense the adults around them can't handle the questions. But I'd catch her sometimes, staring at the couch where he used to read to her, or setting the table for 3 people before remembering we were back to being just 2. I tried calling information for Thompson & Associates, But when I finally got through to their office, the receptionist told me that Mr. Thompson was unavailable and would contact me if necessary. What the hell did that mean? Alexander had made it sound like this lawyer was some kind of safety net, but I couldn't even get past his secretary. Sleep became impossible. I'd lie awake replaying every conversation Alexander and I had, looking for clues about who he really was or where he might have gone, the nightmares he'd had, the names he'd whispered. Sebastian, Victoria, Charlotte, started to feel like pieces of a puzzle I was desperate to solve, but every lead I tried to follow hit a dead end. I found myself driving past places we'd never been together, looking for him in crowds where he couldn't possibly be. The rational part of my brain knew I was being ridiculous, but grief doesn't listen to reason. I was mourning someone who wasn't dead, missing someone who'd chosen to leave, and that somehow made it worse than losing Ryan. At least with Ryan. I knew it wasn't his choice to go. Work became my refuge. At the hospital, I could focus on other people's problems, lose myself in the controlled chaos of emergency medicine. But even there, Alexander haunted me. I'd see a patient with dark hair and my heart would skip, or someone would speak with a cultured accent and I'd have to excuse myself to cry in a supply closet. "You look like hell," my colleague Sarah told me during a break one night. "And before you say you're fine, don't. We've been friends too long for you to lie to me." I wanted to tell her everything. But how do you explain that you've fallen in love with a mysterious stranger who disappeared without a trace? That you're pretty sure he was running from something dangerous, possibly criminal. That you have a lawyer's name, but no way to contact him. "Remember when you asked me if I'd ever consider dating again?" I said instead. "Yeah, and you said you weren't ready." Well, I was wrong. I was ready, and it was perfect. And now it's over. Sarah studied my face with the intensity she usually reserved for reading x-rays. "Madison, what happened? Did someone hurt you?" "No," I said quickly. "Nothing like that. He just left. Men are bastards," she said with the conviction of someone who'd been through 2 divorces. "Present company excluded for my current husband, but generally speaking, bastards." I wanted to defend Alexander, to explain that it wasn't like that. But how could I when I didn't understand it myself? His letter said he was protecting us. But from what? Who were these dangerous people he was so afraid of? And why couldn't he trust me enough to face whatever it was together? The worst part was watching Emma try to pretend she wasn't hurt. She'd gotten attached to Alexander faster than I'd expected, and his sudden absence left her confused and withdrawn. She stopped talking about him after the first week, but I'd catch her sometimes, sitting by the window like she was waiting for him to come walking up our front steps. One night, about 10 days after he'd left, she crawled into bed with me. "Mommy, did I do something wrong? Is that why Alexander left?" My heart shattered. "Oh, sweetheart, no, you didn't do anything wrong." Sometimes adults have to make really hard choices, and it has nothing to do with the people they care about. Like when Daddy died. Yes, exactly like that. Sometimes things happen that aren't anyone's fault. But lying there in the dark, holding my daughter while she cried herself to sleep, I wondered if I was telling her the truth. Maybe this was my fault. Maybe I'd pushed too hard, fallen too fast, scared Alexander away with the intensity of my feelings. By the end of the second week, I was starting to accept that he really wasn't coming back. The coffee I'd been making for 2 people went back to being made for 1. I stopped checking my phone every 5 minutes. I started sleeping on Ryan's side of the bed because Alexander's side still smelled like him and it hurt too much. That's when everything changed again. The knock on my door came at exactly 9:17 a.m. on a gray January morning. I know the exact time because I was staring at the clock on my microwave, trying to summon the energy to make breakfast for Emma before school. It had been exactly 2 weeks since Alexander disappeared, and I was still moving through life like I was underwater, everything muffled and slow. 3 men in expensive suits stood on my front porch, their breath forming clouds in the frigid Detroit air. They looked so out of place in my working-class neighborhood that for a moment I thought they had the wrong address. Men like this didn't come to houses like mine unless something was very, very wrong. "Ms. Madison Carter," the tallest one spoke, his voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from years of practice delivering bad news. "Yes." My hand tightened on the doorframe. After losing Ryan in a car accident, unexpected visitors in suits could only mean one thing. Someone else I cared about was dead. "I'm Robert Thompson from Thompson & Associates," These are my colleagues, Mr. Davidson and Mr. Pierce. May we come in? We have some important matters to discuss regarding Alexander Kingsley Hamilton. Alexander Kingsley Hamilton. Even hearing a last name for him sent a shock through my system. But Hamilton, that name sounded familiar in a way that made my stomach clench with dread. I led them to my living room, the same space where Alexander had spent 3 weeks recovering, where we'd fallen in love, where Emma had learned to trust again. Now it felt like a museum of memories I wasn't sure were even real anymore. Ms. Carter, Mr. Thompson began, pulling out a thick manila folder. I'm afraid I have some very difficult news. Alexander Hamilton died 3 days ago in a car accident in Chicago. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd known something terrible had happened. You don't feel that kind of emptiness in your chest when someone you love is just busy somewhere else. But hearing it confirmed, having it stated so matter-of-factly by a stranger in my living room, made it real in a way that stopped my breathing. A car accident, I repeated numbly. Just like Ryan, how was that possible? I'm very sorry for your loss, Mr. Thompson continued. Alexander left specific instructions that if anything happened to him, we were to contact you immediately. You see, Miss Carter, Alexander wasn't quite who you thought he was. I stared at him, my mind struggling to process what he was saying. I don't understand. Alexander Kingsley Hamilton was the sole heir to one of the largest business empires in the United States. The Hamilton Group is valued at approximately $3 billion, with holdings in real estate, technology, pharmaceuticals, and international trade. $3 billion. The man who'd been sleeping on my couch, eating my leftover Chinese takeout, playing dolls with my 8-year-old daughter, he was a billionaire. It didn't make sense. Nothing about this made sense. That's impossible, I said. He didn't have any money. I mean, he bought Christmas presents, but nothing extravagant. I stopped, realizing how little I actually knew about Alexander's daily life before he'd shown up beaten and bloody on that sidewalk. Mr. Davidson opened his briefcase and pulled out what looked like a detailed report. Ms. Carter, there's more. Alexander prepared an extensive file about his family and his situation. He wanted you to understand why he had to leave, and why his death puts you and your daughter in potential danger. Danger? My protective instincts kicked in immediately. What kind of danger? Emma's at school. Do I need to pick her up? She's safe for now, Mr. Thompson assured me. But you need to understand the full picture. Alexander spent months preparing for this possibility. He suspected his family might try to have him killed. Killed. The word came out as a whisper. You're saying he was murdered. We believe so, yes. Just like his brother was 6 years ago. The room started spinning. His brother, Mr. Thompson consulted his notes, and when he looked up at me, his expression was filled with something that might have been pity. Mrs. Carter, what was the full name of your daughter's father? Ryan Mitchell, I said automatically. He died in a car accident when Emma was 2. Are you certain about that name? Something cold settled in my stomach. Of course I'm certain. We were together for 4 years. We were going to get married. Mr. Davidson handed me a photograph from the file. It was a family portrait, obviously expensive and professionally done. A stern-looking older man sat in the center, flanked by a much younger blonde woman who was clearly his second wife. Standing behind them were 4 people in their 20s and 30s, and there, unmistakably, was Ryan. This photograph was taken 8 years ago, Mr. Thompson said gently. The young man you knew as Ryan Mitchell was actually Ryan Kingsley Hamilton, Alexander's younger brother. I stared at the photo until my eyes blurred. It was Ryan. No question about it. But he looked different, polished, wealthy. Nothing like the sweet, slightly struggling guy I'd fallen in love with who worked construction and drove a beat-up Toyota. That's not possible, I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I was remembering things. The way Ryan sometimes slipped into what sounded like boarding school speech patterns when he was tired. His inexplicable knowledge of wine and art. The expensive watch he'd claimed was a family heirloom, but wouldn't tell me more about. Ryan ran away from the family when he was 22. Mr. Thompson continued. He'd discovered some irregularities in the family business and threatened to expose them. The family couldn't allow that to happen. So they killed him. Yes. And they made it look like an accident. Just like they did with Alexander. I felt like I was drowning. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about Ryan, about the past 6 years. was crumbling around me. Why are you telling me this? What does any of this have to do with me and Emma? Mr. Pierce spoke for the first time. Because, Miss Carter, Alexander has left his entire estate to you and your daughter. As of this morning, you are the legal guardians of a $3 billion fortune. The laugh that escaped me sounded hysterical even to my own ears. That's insane. I'm a nurse. I live paycheck to paycheck. I can't even afford to fix my car's air conditioning. Alexander's will is very specific, Mr. Thompson said, pulling out official-looking documents. He's left everything to Emma as Ryan's daughter, with you as trustee until she turns 25. But there's a condition. What condition? You have to use the resources to continue his work. Alexander spent the last 6 years of his life investigating his brother's death and gathering evidence against the people responsible. He wanted to destroy the criminal network his family had built. Criminal network. I thought about Alexander's nightmares, the names he'd whispered in his sleep. Sebastian, Victoria, Charlotte. His family are criminals. Money laundering primarily, but also fraud, bribery, and as you now know, murder. Alexander gathered enough evidence to bring down the entire operation, but he died before he could act on it. And he wants me to finish what he started. It wasn't a question. The file contains everything you need. Names, dates, financial records, recorded conversations. Alexander was very thorough. I stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. Emma would be home from school in a few hours, expecting normal mom things like help with homework and after-school snacks. How was I supposed to explain that her father wasn't who we thought he was? That the man she'd grown to love was his brother, and that we were now billionaires with a target on our backs? What if I don't want the money? I asked. What if I just want to keep Emma safe and live our quiet life? I'm afraid that's not an option, Mr. Thompson said sadly. The family knows about you now. They know Emma is Ryan's daughter and therefore a legitimate heir to the Hamilton fortune. Whether you accept Alexander's inheritance or not, they'll see you as a threat. So our choices are become billionaires with a target on our backs, or stay poor with a target on our backs. Essentially, yes. But Miss Carter, Alexander believed that the only way to truly protect you and Emma was to destroy the people who killed Ryan. As long as they're free, you'll never be safe. I thought about Alexander's letter, about his promise that Mr. Thompson would take care of us. I'd thought he meant financially, but this was so much bigger than that. He'd set up an elaborate plan to continue his mission even after his death, and somehow I'd become the key player in a game I didn't understand. There's one more thing, Mr. Thompson said, his voice gentler than it had been all morning. Alexander left you a personal letter. He wanted you to read it after you learned the truth about everything else. He handed me an envelope with my name written in Alexander's familiar handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it, and through my tears, I began to read the final words of the man I'd loved and lost, after the lawyers left. I sat alone in my living room holding Alexander's final letter, surrounded by boxes of evidence that painted a picture so horrifying I could barely wrap my mind around it. The afternoon sun streamed through my windows, but everything felt cold and surreal, like I was living in someone else's nightmare. Alexander's letter was different from the first one. Longer, more detailed, written with the knowledge that by the time I read it, I'd already learned the devastating truth about who he really was, and why he'd had to leave. My dearest Madison, if you're reading this, then Thompson has told you everything. I can only imagine how betrayed you must feel right now, how angry you are at me for the lies I told by omission. I need you to know that everything between us was real. My love for you, my feelings for Emma, the happiness I found in your home, that was the most honest I've ever been in my entire life. When I found you that night on the sidewalk outside the hospital, it wasn't random. I'd been looking for you for months. Madison, after Ryan died, I hired investigators to find out what had happened to his girlfriend and daughter. It took me 6 years to track you down. I came to Detroit planning to observe you from a distance, to make sure you and Emma were okay, maybe to provide some anonymous financial help. I never intended to insert myself into your lives, but that night, walking past the hospital where you worked, I was attacked by men my family had hired to kill me. When I woke up and saw your face, saw the same compassion and strength that had made my brother fall in love with you, I made a selfish decision. I let you save me, not just physically, but emotionally. For 3 weeks, I got to pretend I was someone else, someone worthy of your love, someone who could be a father figure to my brother's daughter. I got to experience the family Ryan had found with you, and it was the most beautiful deception of my life. But here's what you need to understand about our family, Madison. The Kingsley Hamilton Empire was built on blood money. My grandfather started it legitimately, but my father expanded into money laundering for organized crime families across the country. By the time I was old enough to understand what was happening, we were washing hundreds of millions of dollars annually. Ryan discovered this when he was 22 and working in the family business. He tried to go to the authorities, but our stepmother Charlotte had connections everywhere. Police, judges, federal agencies. When Ryan threatened to expose everything anyway, they made their choice. They decided he was too dangerous to live. The car accident that killed Ryan was carefully orchestrated. They tampered with his brakes and timed it perfectly to look accidental. What they didn't count on was Ryan being smart enough to change his identity and disappear for 2 years before they found him. I suspected the truth almost immediately, but I had no proof. So I spent 6 years playing the role of the loyal son while secretly gathering evidence. I documented everything: financial records, recorded conversations, witness testimonies. The file Thompson gave you contains enough evidence to destroy not just our family, but the entire criminal network they've been serving. Charlotte, my stepmother, has been the true power behind everything since my father's death 3 years ago. She's 50 years old, brilliant, and absolutely ruthless. She married into the family purely for power and money, and she's willing to kill anyone who threatens that. My half-siblings, Sebastian and Victoria, are her biological children, and they've been raised to see the family business as their birthright. Sebastian is 32, violent, and handles the enforcement side of operations. Victoria is 26, highly educated, and manages the financial aspects of the money laundering. Together, they've turned our family into something monstrous. They've killed at least 5 other people who tried to leave or expose the organization. Ryan wasn't their first victim, and I won't be their last unless someone stops them. That someone has to be you, Madison. I know how impossible this must sound. You're a nurse, a single mother, a good person who just wants to raise her daughter in peace. But Emma is Ryan's daughter, which makes her a legitimate Hamilton heir. As long as Charlotte and her children are alive and free, they will never stop seeing Emma as a threat to their inheritance. The $3 billion I'm leaving you isn't just money. It's a weapon. Use it to hire the best lawyers, the best investigators, the best security. Use it to finish what Ryan and I started. Use it to make sure Emma grows up in a world where the people who killed her father can never hurt anyone else. I've already begun laying the groundwork. The evidence is organized and ready for prosecution. I've identified federal agents who can be trusted. I've even prepared a comprehensive strategy for taking down the entire organization. But Madison, you need to be careful. Charlotte is incredibly intelligent and completely without conscience. She'll try to discredit you, to make you look like a gold digger or an unfit mother. She'll use every resource at her disposal to destroy you before you can destroy her. Trust Thompson. He's been helping me for 2 years, and his loyalty is absolute. Trust Agent Rebecca Martinez from the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. She's been investigating the family's money laundering operation independently. Don't trust anyone else until you're certain of their motives. I'm sorry I couldn't stay to fight this battle beside you. I'm sorry I had to deceive you about who I was. I'm sorry I'm asking you to risk everything for justice for a man you loved, and a man who loved you. But most of all, I'm sorry I'll never get to watch Emma grow up. Never get to marry you like I dreamed about during those perfect 3 weeks. Never get to be the family the 3 of us deserve to be. You are stronger than you know, Madison Carter. You have a good heart, a brilliant mind, and now you have unlimited resources. Use them to protect our girl and honor Ryan's memory. I love you both more than life itself. Forever yours. Alexander, I must have read that letter 5 times before Emma got home from school. Each time, new details jumped out at me, new implications that made my head spin. Alexander had been looking for us for months. He'd known who I was from the moment I found him. Our entire relationship had been built on a foundation of secrets and half-truths, but somehow, that didn't make it feel less real. If anything, understanding the lengths he'd gone to just to make sure Emma and I were safe made his love feel even more profound. He'd risked everything to give us 3 weeks of happiness, knowing it would probably cost him his life. When Emma burst through the front door that afternoon, chattering about her day at school, I looked at her with completely new eyes. She wasn't just my daughter anymore. She was Ryan Kingsley Hamilton's daughter, heir to a fortune built on blood and crime, and apparently a target for murder by people who saw her as an obstacle to their power. "Mommy, why do you look so sad?" she asked, climbing onto my lap with the intuitive concern that 8-year-olds possess. "How do you explain to a child that her entire life history is a lie? That her father was secretly a billionaire who was murdered by his own family? That the man she'd grown to love over Christmas was actually her uncle? And that he'd just been killed by the same people who'd killed her daddy? Emma, baby, we need to have a very serious talk," I said, holding her close. "Some people came to see Mommy today, and they told me some things about your daddy that I never knew before." Over the next hour, I tried to explain everything in terms an 8-year-old could understand. Her father wasn't really Ryan Mitchell. He was Ryan Hamilton, and he'd had to change his name to keep them safe. Alexander was her daddy's brother, which made him her uncle, and both of them had been hurt by very bad people who didn't want anyone to know about the bad things they'd done. Emma listened with the solemnity that children reserve for truly important conversations. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time, processing information that would have overwhelmed most adults. "So, Alexander was my Uncle Alexander?" she finally asked. "Yes, sweetheart. And the bad people hurt him too." "Yes. Are they going to try to hurt us?" The question I'd been dreading. "I don't know, baby, but Mommy's going to make sure they can't. Uncle Alexander left us some things that will help us stop the bad people." That night, after Emma was asleep, I spread out all the evidence Alexander had gathered across my kitchen table. Financial records showing hundreds of millions of dollars being funneled through legitimate businesses. Photographs of meetings between Charlotte Hamilton and known crime bosses. Audio recordings of conversations where they discussed eliminating threats to their operation. And at the bottom of the pile, a list of names. 5 people who'd tried to leave or expose the Hamilton organization over the past 6 years. 5 people who'd died in accidents remarkably similar to Ryan's car crash. I stared at that list until my eyes burned, thinking about families like mine who'd lost someone they loved to these monsters. Thinking about Emma growing up without her father because some wealthy sociopaths had decided he was inconvenient. By dawn, I'd made my decision. Alexander was right. As long as Charlotte, Sebastian, and Victoria Hamilton were free, Emma would never be safe, and neither would anyone else who crossed their path. It was time to declare war. The next 3 months were like living in a war zone where the battlefield was courtrooms and law offices instead of actual combat. I'd never imagined that grief could transform into such focused rage, that the need to protect Emma could turn me into someone I barely recognized, someone capable of going toe-to-toe with billion-dollar lawyers and stone-cold killers. Thompson moved fast once I gave him the green light, within a week. We'd filed wrongful death lawsuits against the Hamilton family for both Ryan's and Alexander's murders. We also initiated probate proceedings to claim Alexander's inheritance. Knowing it would flush Charlotte and her children out of hiding and force them to reveal their hand, I'll never forget the first time I saw Charlotte Hamilton in person. It was during a preliminary hearing at the Wayne County Courthouse, and she walked into that courtroom like she owned it, 50 years old, impeccably dressed in what I'm sure was a designer suit that cost more than my annual salary, with the kind of cold beauty that comes from having everything money can buy except a soul. She looked at me across that courtroom like I was something disgusting she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. Not anger. That would have implied I was worth getting emotional about. Just this calculated assessment of an obstacle that needed to be removed. Sebastian was exactly what I'd expected from Alexander's descriptions. A well-dressed thug who couldn't quite hide the violence beneath his expensive veneer. He kept staring at Emma, who I'd had to bring to court because I couldn't afford to leave her with anyone who wasn't part of our new security team. The way he looked at my 8-year-old daughter made my skin crawl, and my protective instincts go into overdrive. Victoria surprised me, though. Alexander had described her as brilliant and educated, but I'd expected someone as cold as her mother. Instead, she seemed nervous, almost fragile. She kept glancing between Charlotte and me like she was watching a tennis match, and I caught her staring at Emma with an expression that looked almost sad. The legal proceedings were a nightmare of bureaucracy and intimidation tactics. Charlotte's lawyers, and she had an army of them, challenged everything. They questioned my fitness as a mother, suggesting that someone with my limited background couldn't possibly be trusted with a fortune of that magnitude. They hired private investigators to dig into every aspect of my life, looking for anything they could use to discredit me. They found out about my student loans, my credit card debt, even a parking ticket from 2019 that I'd forgotten to pay. They tried to paint me as a gold digger who'd manipulated a troubled man into changing his will. The fact that I'd never even known Alexander was wealthy until after his death didn't seem to matter to them. But the worst part was how they attacked my relationship with Ryan. They claimed he'd never really loved me, that he'd just been using me as a cover while he hid from his family. They presented evidence that our relationship had been rocky, that he'd been planning to leave me before his death. Sitting in those depositions, listening to expensive lawyers tear apart the most precious memories of my life, was torture. But every time I wanted to break down, I'd look at Emma coloring quietly in the corner and remember why we were fighting. This wasn't just about money or justice anymore. It was about ensuring that my daughter could grow up without looking over her shoulder for the rest of her life. Thompson was incredible throughout all of this. He'd clearly learned from Alexander how to think 10 steps ahead, and he'd anticipated every move Charlotte's team made. When they questioned my financial responsibility, he pointed out that I'd been successfully supporting a family on a nurse's salary for 6 years. When they attacked my character, he produced character witnesses from colleagues, friends, and even patients' families who testified to my integrity. But it was the evidence from Alexander's investigation that really began to turn the tide. Thompson and his team had spent months organizing everything Alexander had gathered, and when they started presenting it in court, you could see Charlotte's confidence begin to crack. Bank records showing suspicious transfers of millions of dollars through shell companies, audio recordings of Charlotte discussing permanent solutions to business problems, testimonies from former employees who'd witnessed intimidation and violence, a paper trail connecting the Hamilton Group to known money laundering operations across 3 states. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, led by Agent Rebecca Martinez, had been building their own case against the Hamilton organization for 2 years. When Thompson reached out to her with Alexander's evidence, it was like providing the missing pieces to a jigsaw puzzle they'd been struggling to complete. Agent Martinez was a small, fierce woman who reminded me of myself in some ways. Someone who'd had to fight for respect in a male-dominated field and had developed a core of steel in the process. She became my lifeline during those dark months. Someone who understood both the legal complexities of what we were dealing with and the very real physical danger we faced. "Madison," she told me during one of our strategy meetings, "what you're doing is incredibly brave, but I need you to understand the stakes here. The Hamilton organization has killed at least 7 people that we know of. They have connections to some very dangerous people, and they're not going to just roll over and accept defeat." She wasn't exaggerating about the danger. Within a month of filing our lawsuit, strange things started happening. Someone tried to break into our house while we were at court. Nothing was stolen, but our security system had been mysteriously disabled. My car tires were slashed twice in the hospital parking lot. Emma started having nightmares about bad men coming to take her away. Thompson hired a security firm to protect us, which meant learning to live with bodyguards and surveillance systems and constantly looking over our shoulders. Emma handled it better than I did. Honestly, kids are remarkably adaptable, and she seemed to accept our new normal with the same resilience she'd shown when Alexander disappeared. But the stress was wearing on both of us. Emma started having trouble sleeping, and I was averaging maybe 3 hours a night myself. I'd lie awake going over case files, financial records, anything that might give us an edge in court. The irony wasn't lost on me. We were now technically billionaires, but I felt more powerless than I ever had in my life. The worst moment came about 2 months into the legal battle. I was picking Emma up from school when Agent Martinez called with news that made my blood run cold. "Madison, we've intercepted communications suggesting the Hamilton family is planning something. We don't have specifics, but our sources indicate they're getting desperate. Charlotte's been meeting with some very unsavory people, and Sebastian has been asking questions about Emma's school schedule. That night, I held my daughter while she slept and wondered if I was doing the right thing. Was pursuing justice for Ryan and Alexander worth putting Emma at risk? Was my need for closure and revenge more important than her safety? But then I'd remember Alexander's words in his letter. As long as Charlotte and her children were free, we'd never truly be safe. They'd already killed Ryan for threatening to expose them. They'd killed Alexander for gathering evidence against them. If we stopped fighting now, how long would it be before they decided Emma was too much of a liability to let live? By the time we walked into the courtroom for what we thought would be the final hearing, I'd made peace with whatever consequences might come. We'd gathered enough evidence to destroy the Hamilton criminal empire, and we had federal agents ready to make arrests the moment the judge ruled in our favor. What I wasn't prepared for was the bombshell that was about to explode in that courtroom, one that would change everything I thought I knew about justice, love, and the lengths someone would go to protect the people they care about most. The final hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday morning in March. I remember because Emma had a spelling test that day, and I'd promised her we'd go for ice cream afterward to celebrate, no matter what happened in court. Looking back, it's funny how you focus on these tiny, normal details when your entire world is about to be turned upside down. Judge Morrison's courtroom was packed. Charlotte sat at the defendant's table with her army of lawyers, looking as composed as ever, though I'd noticed dark circles under her eyes that even expensive makeup couldn't completely hide. Sebastian kept fidgeting, his usual swagger replaced by something that looked suspiciously like panic. Victoria seemed smaller somehow, hunched in her chair like she was trying to disappear. Thompson had warned me that this hearing would be intense. We were presenting our final evidence package, everything Alexander had gathered, plus what the FBI had uncovered in their parallel investigation. If Judge Morrison ruled in our favor, Charlotte and her children would likely be arrested before they left the courthouse. "Are you ready for this?" Agent Martinez whispered as she took her seat behind us. Federal agents were positioned throughout the courtroom, ready to move the moment they got the signal. I squeezed Emma's hand. She was sitting next to me, coloring in a book but listening to everything with that sharp intelligence kids have when adults think they're not paying attention. As ready as I'll ever be, Thompson stood to present our case, and I felt that familiar mix of hope and terror that had become my constant companion over the past 3 months. This was it. The moment we'd find out if all the sleepless nights, all the fear, all the legal battles had been worth it. He was halfway through his opening statement when the courtroom doors burst open. I heard the commotion before I saw what was causing it. Gasps from the gallery, someone crying out in shock. Charlotte's sharp intake of breath that cut through the noise like a blade. I turned around, and my heart stopped. Alexander was walking down the center aisle, flanked by FBI agents. Very much alive, the courtroom erupted into chaos. Charlotte's face went white, then red, then white again. Sebastian jumped to his feet, knocking over his chair, and tried to bolt for the exit before being tackled by federal agents. Victoria just stared, tears streaming down her face, her mouth moving like she was trying to speak, but no words were coming out. But I couldn't focus on any of them. All I could see was Alexander, the man I'd mourned, the man I'd grieved for, the man whose death had sent me on this crusade for justice, walking toward me like he'd just stepped out of a dream. "Mommy?" Emma's voice cut through my shock. "Is that Uncle Alexander?" I couldn't answer her. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. 3 months of agony, of believing he was dead, of carrying the weight of his final mission. And he was alive. He was alive, and he'd let me suffer through all of this, believing he was gone. Order in the court. Judge Morrison was banging his gavel, but it took several minutes for the chaos to die down enough for anyone to speak. Alexander approached our table, and when his eyes met mine, I saw a mixture of love, regret, and something that might have been fear. "Madison," he said softly, "I can explain everything. You're supposed to be dead," I whispered, my voice barely audible even to myself. "You died in a car accident." They showed me the police report. Agent Martinez stood up. "Your Honor, if I may explain, Mr. Alexander Hamilton has been working undercover with the FBI for the past 4 months. His death was staged." Staged. The word hit me like a physical blow. Staged. Alexander looked like he wanted to reach for me but didn't dare. "Madison, I needed them to believe I was dead so they'd reveal themselves. It was the only way to get enough evidence to get out," I said, my voice stronger now, fueled by a rage I didn't even know I was capable of. "Get away from me. Madison, please." "No." I was standing now, my hands shaking with fury. "You let me think you were dead. Do you have any idea what the past 3 months have been like? Do you know what it did to Emma? She cried herself to sleep for weeks thinking you'd abandoned her. And then I had to tell her you were dead." Emma was staring between us, her 8-year-old mind trying to process the adult drama unfolding around her. "Uncle Alexander, Why is Mommy so mad? Are you really not dead? The question broke my heart. Leave it to a child to cut through all the complicated emotions to the simple truth. He wasn't dead. So why was I angry? I'm not dead, sweetheart, Alexander said gently, kneeling down to Emma's level. I had to pretend to be dead to catch some very bad people. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you and Mommy the truth. Madison, Agent Martinez said quietly. I know this is a shock, but we need to proceed with the hearing. Charlotte and her family are still dangerous, and this is our chance to end this. I looked across the courtroom at Charlotte, who had recovered some of her composure, and was whispering urgently with her lawyers. Sebastian was in handcuffs now, being held by 2 federal agents, but he was staring at Alexander with pure hatred. Victoria was still crying, but she'd started speaking to someone who looked like a federal prosecutor. How long have you been working with them? I asked Alexander, my voice hollow. Since before I met you, he admitted. The FBI approached me 2 years ago when their investigation into the family's money laundering operation stalled. They needed someone on the inside. So everything was a lie. Finding you on that sidewalk, you being attacked. All of it was fake. No, he said quickly. The attack was real. Charlotte's men really were trying to kill me that night. The FBI hadn't expected them to move so quickly when I woke up and saw you, when you took me home. That wasn't part of any plan. That was just fate. But you knew who I was. Yes, I'd been looking for you for months. But I never intended to involve you in any of this. You were supposed to stay safe, anonymous. But when you saved my life that night, everything changed. Judge Morrison cleared his throat. While I'm sure this is a very emotional reunion, we have serious criminal charges to address. Agent Martinez. I assume you're ready to proceed with arrests? Yes, Your Honor. We have enough evidence to charge Charlotte Hamilton, Sebastian Hamilton, and at least 6 other members of their organization with money laundering, fraud, conspiracy, and multiple counts of murder. What happened next was like watching a movie and fast forward. Charlotte was read her rights and handcuffed, her composure finally cracking as she screamed that this was all a setup, that Alexander had manipulated everyone. Sebastian was already on his way to a holding cell, having resisted arrest and earned himself additional charges, but Victoria surprised everyone. As the federal agents approached her, she stood up and spoke clearly. I want to make a deal. I'll tell you everything I know about the organization, every crime we've committed, every person we've hurt. I want to cooperate fully. The next few hours were a blur of statements, arrests, and media chaos as news crews descended on the courthouse. Through it all, Alexander stayed close but didn't try to touch me, respecting the wall of hurt and betrayal I'd built around myself. Finally, when the legal circus had died down and Emma and I were alone with Alexander in a private conference room, I had to ask the question that had been burning in my chest all day. Did you ever really love me? Or was I just part of some elaborate undercover operation? Alexander looked at me with those blue eyes that had haunted my dreams for months, and when he spoke, his voice was raw with emotion. Madison, falling in love with you was the most real thing that's ever happened to me. Everything else, the investigation, the fake death, the legal battles, that was all about justice for Ryan and protecting you and Emma. But what I felt for you, what I still feel for you, that was never part of any plan. I wanted to believe him. God, how badly I wanted to believe him. But 3 months of thinking he was dead, 3 months of fighting his battles while grieving his loss, had changed something fundamental inside me. Trust, once broken, doesn't heal overnight. Even when love survives the breaking, the trial that followed was unlike anything I could have imagined. What started as a wrongful death lawsuit had transformed into the largest organized crime prosecution in Michigan's history. For 6 weeks, I sat in that courtroom day after day, watching as the full scope of the Hamilton family's criminal empire was laid bare for the world to see. Charlotte's composure finally cracked completely on the 3rd day of testimony, when Agent Martinez presented recordings of her discussing Ryan's murder with chilling casualness. She broke down and started screaming at Alexander across the courtroom. You ungrateful bastard, everything we did was to protect this family. Your father would be ashamed of what you've become. Watching her mask slip away was both satisfying and terrifying. This was the woman who'd ordered the death of the man I loved, who'd been planning to kill my daughter, who'd destroyed countless families in pursuit of money and power. Seeing her reduced to a snarling, desperate creature should have felt like victory, but mostly, it just felt sad. Sebastian's trial was shorter, but more violent. He'd been charged with multiple counts of murder, including Ryan's, and when the prosecution played video evidence of him personally threatening witnesses, he lunged at the prosecutor and had to be restrained by 4 bailiffs. His lawyer eventually entered a plea of not guilty by reason of mental defect, which was laughable considering how calculated his crimes had been. But it was Victoria's testimony that really broke my heart. Over the course of 3 days, she systematically dismantled everything I thought I knew about the Hamilton family dynamics. Charlotte hadn't just been the stepmother. She'd been an abusive manipulator who'd spent Victoria's entire childhood convincing her that criminal behavior was normal, that violence was justified, that family loyalty meant blind obedience. I was 12 when my mother first made me help launder money, Victoria testified, tears streaming down her face. She told me it was a game, that we were smarter than the government, that we deserved everything we took. By the time I was old enough to understand what we were really doing, I was already so deep in it that leaving seemed impossible. Victoria revealed that Charlotte had been poisoning her own husband, Alexander's father, with small doses of arsenic for over 2 years before his death. She'd also been embezzling money from the family business to fund her own separate criminal enterprises. The woman who'd presented herself as the grieving widow protecting her family's legacy had actually been a master manipulator, orchestrating everything from behind the scenes. The most devastating revelation came when Victoria described the night Ryan was killed. Charlotte had invited him to a family dinner under the pretense of reconciliation, then drugged his wine before having Sebastian tamper with his car. They'd followed him for miles, waiting for the perfect moment to force him off the road in a way that would look accidental. "My mother made me watch," Victoria sobbed. "She said I needed to understand what happened to people who betrayed the family. Ryan was begging for his life, saying he had a girlfriend and a little girl who needed him. My mother just laughed." Sitting there listening to the details of how Ryan died, I had to leave the courtroom twice to compose myself. Emma was staying with Mrs. Rodriguez during the trial, and I was grateful she couldn't see me falling apart as I learned the truth about her father's final moments. Alexander testified for 2 full days, methodically walking the jury through 6 years of evidence gathering. He explained how he'd suspected the truth about Ryan's death from the beginning, how he'd spent years pretending loyalty while secretly documenting crimes, how he'd worked with the FBI to stage his own death when Charlotte's suspicions about his activities became too dangerous to ignore. "The hardest part," he said, looking directly at me from the witness stand, "was letting Madison believe I was dead. But Charlotte had already proven she was willing to kill family members who threatened her. If she'd suspected that Madison and Emma meant something to me, she would have eliminated them without hesitation." When the prosecution asked about his relationship with me, Alexander's voice grew softer. "Madison Carter saved my life in every way a person can be saved. She gave me hope, love, and a reason to keep fighting for justice. My biggest regret is that protecting her required breaking her heart." The defense tried to paint Alexander as a bitter son seeking revenge against his stepmother, but the evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, audio recordings, witness testimonies, and physical evidence painted a picture of systematic criminal activity spanning over a decade. When the verdicts came down, I felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion that went bone deep. Charlotte was convicted on all counts: first-degree murder, conspiracy, money laundering, fraud, and racketeering. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Sebastian received 45 years for his role in multiple murders and his leadership in the criminal organization. Even with good behavior, he'd be in his 70s before he could even think about parole. Victoria's cooperation had earned her a more lenient sentence. The judge acknowledged that she'd been manipulated and abused from childhood, that her cooperation had been essential to securing convictions, and that she'd shown genuine remorse for her actions. She was sentenced to 8 years with the possibility of parole in 4. After the sentencing, I found myself alone with Victoria in the courthouse hallway. She looked so much younger than her 26 years, almost childlike in her oversized suit and with her face puffy from crying. "I know you probably hate me," she said quietly, "and I understand why. I was part of the organization that killed Ryan. That tried to hurt you and Emma." I studied her face, looking for any sign of the manipulation or coldness I'd seen in Charlotte and Sebastian. But all I saw was a broken young woman who'd spent her entire life being told that wrong was right. "I don't hate you," I said, surprising myself with how true it was. You were a victim too, Victoria. Maybe not in the same way Emma and I were, but Charlotte destroyed your childhood just like she destroyed Ryan's life. Victoria started crying again. I want to make amends somehow. I know I can't bring Ryan back, and I know I can't undo the years of pain you've suffered. But maybe when I get out, I could help with whatever foundation you and Alexander are planning. I could help prevent other families from going through what we put you through. Looking at her tear-stained face, I made a decision that Alexander would later tell me was either incredibly wise or incredibly naive. Victoria, you don't have to wait until you're released to start making amends. If you really want to help, if you really want to honor Ryan's memory, there are things you can do from prison, testimonials for other victims, cooperation with ongoing investigations, education programs about financial crimes. She nodded eagerly. Yes, anything. I'll do anything to try to make this right. 6 months later, I was back in that same courthouse, but this time for a very different reason. Alexander and I were getting married in Judge Morrison's chambers, with Emma as our only witness, and Thompson serving as Alexander's best man. It was a small, quiet ceremony, nothing like the elaborate wedding I'd once dreamed of having with Ryan, but perfect for the complicated, hard-won love Alexander and I had built together. Emma had been the one to suggest we get married there. It's where the bad people got punished and where Uncle Alexander came back to life, she'd said with 8-year-old logic. It seems like the right place for good things to happen too. As we exchanged vows, I thought about everything we'd been through to get to this moment. The lies, the betrayal, the months of grief and anger. They'd all been necessary parts of a larger story about justice, redemption, and the power of love to survive even the most impossible circumstances. When Judge Morrison pronounced us husband and wife, Alexander kissed me softly and whispered, "Thank you for forgiving me. Thank you for letting me come home." And for the first time in almost a year, I felt like we finally were home. 1 year later, I'm sitting in the garden of our home in Beverly Hills, watching Alexander push Emma on the swing set we had installed last month. The California sunshine feels warm on my face, and for the first time in what feels like forever, I'm not looking over my shoulder or waiting for the other shoe to drop. We're safe. We're together. We're home. It's hard to believe sometimes that the woman sitting here in designer jeans and a cashmere sweater is the same nurse who used to worry about making rent on a house in Highland Park. The transition from struggling single mom to billionaire philanthropist has been surreal, but Alexander and I have worked hard to make sure the money changes our circumstances, without changing who we are at our core. Emma has adapted to our new life with the resilience that continues to amaze me. She goes to an excellent private school now, has art tutors and music lessons, and more toys than she knows what to do with. But her favorite activity is still our Saturday morning visits to the animal shelter, where she volunteers to help walk dogs and play with cats who need homes. "Mommy," she calls from the swing. "Watch this." She pumps her legs harder, trying to get maximum height, her laughter echoing across our beautifully landscaped yard. At 9 years old, she's growing into this incredible little person who somehow carries both Ryan's gentle spirit and Alexander's quiet strength. She calls Alexander Uncle Daddy now, a term she invented that makes me smile every time I hear it. It honors both the truth of their relationship and the role he's chosen to play in her life. He's never tried to replace Ryan in her memories, but he's created his own special place in her heart. The Hamilton Foundation has become our life's work. What started as a way to use Alexander's inheritance for good has grown into one of the largest anti-corruption organizations in the country. We've helped prosecute 17 different criminal organizations, provided support to over 300 families affected by financial crimes, and established scholarship programs for children who've lost parents to violence. Victoria was released on parole 2 months ago after serving just over 2 years. True to her word, she's thrown herself into redemption work with the kind of intensity that only comes from genuine remorse. She lives in a small apartment downtown and works as our foundation's director of victim outreach, using her insider knowledge of criminal organizations to help other families navigate the legal system. Emma adores her Aunt Victoria. As she started calling her, Victoria brings out this protective, nurturing side that I don't think anyone in her family ever encouraged before, watching them together. Victoria teaching Emma to braid friendship bracelets or helping with math homework. It's hard to imagine this gentle woman was once part of a criminal empire. "You know what's funny?" Victoria said to me last week as we worked together preparing care packages for families going through legal battles similar to ours. I spent my whole childhood thinking love meant control, that family meant blind loyalty no matter what horrible things people did. Being here with you and Alexander and Emma, this is the first time I've understood what real family actually looks like. Alexander and I have our own daily rituals now. Every morning, he makes coffee and brings it to me in bed, just like he used to do during those 3 weeks in my little house in Detroit. We talk about foundation business, about Emma's school projects, about the ordinary, beautiful details of a life we've built together. Sometimes we talk about Ryan, keeping his memory alive for Emma while honoring the complicated path that brought us all together. The nightmares have mostly stopped. Alexander still occasionally talks in his sleep, but now it's usually about foundation projects or worries about Emma's homework rather than the violent memories that used to torment him. I sleep soundly now, wrapped in the arms of a man who's proven his love by literally risking everything to protect Emma and me. We visit Ryan's grave together every month. It's in a beautiful cemetery overlooking Lake Michigan, and Alexander insisted we replace the simple headstone I could afford with something that truly honors who Ryan was. The new granite memorial reads, Ryan Kingsley Hamilton, beloved father, partner, and brother, a man who chose love over fear. Emma always brings flowers and tells her daddy about her latest adventures. Last month, she informed him that she's decided to become a lawyer when she grows up so she can catch bad guys like Uncle Daddy and Mommy do. Alexander and I exchanged glances over her head, both of us thinking the same thing. Ryan would be so proud of the remarkable young woman she's becoming. The media attention has mostly died down now, though we still occasionally get interview requests about the Hamilton crime family takedown, as the press dubbed it. We've learned to be selective about which stories we participate in, focusing on opportunities to raise awareness about financial crimes and support other victims' families. Charlotte died in prison 6 months ago. A heart attack, they said, though I suspect it was more a case of a woman who'd lived her entire life controlling others finally being confronted with consequences she couldn't manipulate her way out of. I felt surprisingly little when I heard the news. Not satisfaction, not sadness, just a sense of a chapter finally closing. Sebastian is still serving his sentence, and will be for decades to come. According to Victoria, he spent his time in prison trying to recruit other inmates into criminal schemes, apparently unable to accept that his old life is over. Some people, I've learned, are simply incapable of change. This afternoon, the 3 of us are planning to visit the children's hospital where Alexander and I volunteer once a week. Emma loves coming with us, reading to younger kids and helping with art therapy sessions. Alexander is incredible with the patients. His own experience with trauma and recovery gives him a unique ability to connect with people who are facing their darkest moments. As I watch him help Emma perfect her swing technique, offering gentle encouragement and celebrating her achievements, I'm struck by how completely our story has transformed. 2 years ago, I was a single mother barely getting by, still mourning a man I thought I'd lost to a random accident. Now I'm married to his brother. We're raising his daughter together, and we've turned their family's legacy of crime into a force for justice and healing. The wounded stranger I found on that snowy sidewalk in Detroit taught me that sometimes the most impossible love stories are the ones that change everything. Ryan brought us together through death, but Alexander has kept us together through life. Emma has grown up knowing that she's surrounded by people who love her enough to fight for her, to protect her, to honor her father's memory while building a future filled with hope. Tonight, after Emma goes to bed, Alexander and I will sit on our back patio and plan our next foundation project. We'll talk about the families we're helping, the criminals we're working to prosecute, the world we're trying to make safer for children like Emma. We'll hold hands and watch the stars and remember how far we've come from that frozen December night when fate brought us together. Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life, but then Alexander kisses me goodnight and whispers, "Thank you for saving me." And Emma calls out, "Love you, Uncle Daddy," from her bedroom. And I know that every moment of pain and fear and uncertainty was worth it to get us here. The broken man I rescued in the snow gave me everything I never knew I needed. Justice for Ryan, safety for Emma, and a love story that proves miracles can grow from the darkest tragedies.